So today we got to talk about the new rogue builds, or at least the one that I've been using the most. I have a lot more coming. I was kind of waiting for the patch 1.1.1 to come out to see whether or not that's going to change anything, and it actually changed everything with the barber. So we're going to have a lot of builds mixing in the barber, but with different kind of core skills. Today we're using twisting blades because a lot of people have been asking for an updated version of the trapper rogue, and it is absolutely crazy good with the changes in patch 1.1.1. So let's get into it. So diving into the skills here, if you want a point-by-point breakdown for any part of this build, it's going to be in the description down below. Starting off though, we're going to be running fundamental puncture with puncture as our basic skill. This is pretty core basically for any rogue build. If you want to get a lot of vulnerable out, this is the way to do it. This is going to give you guaranteed single target vulnerable and is really important for taking out those bosses and elites. Twisting blades is a skill of choice today, although you could actually run this build with, honestly, any of the core skills. I've tried them all and they all work. I'm just showing you the best version, and that's going to be twisting blades. Unfortunately, we are going to be running improved twisting blades because this is going to be our source of days for another passive down here. But we have sturdy for close damage reduction, shadow step for our CC break with the additional cooldown reduction, weapon mastery for a little bit extra damage, and here is concussive, trick attacks, and rapid gambits. This is going to give us extra crit chance when we knock down people, and we're going to be doing that with our poison trap and with our trick attacks here, which we're going to be dazing with our twisting blades. And because we will critically strike very often with our barber, we're going to be able to potentially knock down the enemies and spread that around, which is really nice. Poison trap is going to give our source of knockdown when we need it on demand, essentially. Exploit plus malice, just extra damage for various different scenarios. Here is the very key part of the build that's a little bit different from all the other trapper builds beforehand. First off, shadow crash, consuming shadows. This gives us permanent full energy if you're not fighting only a boss. The reason this is because whenever we kill an enemy with shadow damage, we're going to generate 20 energy. Now beforehand, this wasn't very strong because you'd have to use, let's say, your shadow imbuement, and there's no guarantee that's going to kill someone, and it was just kind of weak. However, the barber counts as shadow damage, and the barber hits for millions, okay, because it stores up all your crit damage and it explodes, does an AoE. This is going to give you basically permanent energy, so you no longer need inner sight, which is really nice when you're clearing trash, that is. Then we're also going to be picking up precision imbuement with our poison imbuement. Poison imbuement now works with barber. Beforehand, it would just absorb your poison hits and you would just not get any poison. Now it actually applies the poison before the detonation happens, which means you're going to get benefit from all the poison passives, and you're also going to go ahead and just get a lot of value out of your poison imbuement. We're also going to be picking up frigid finesse because we are going to be running the penitent greaves for additional chilling and potential freezes. Very solid. And of course, death trap. It wouldn't be a trapper build without death trap. It's super important that you run this. Trap mastery for extra crit chance, and we're going to put a point into adrenaline rush for extra energy regeneration when we're moving, and haste while we're going to have basically all full energy. If we're not moving around, we're going to get extra increased movement speed when we are moving around, which is going to be nice, and have that energy regeneration. Also, we're going to get a little bit of extra increased attack speed while we're below that maximum energy, which is going to help against bosses in particular. Then we're going to be running exposure. Now, exposure beforehand basically would just never work ever. However, I've noticed that it actually does end up working with the barber now, albeit it's still a little bit awkward. It doesn't seem as effective, but it seems to actually work to some degree, along with a lot of other skills that are working here. But I've actually found some synergy with running the momentum passive, although that's a little bit out of a different build. You can run either of these, to be honest. There's not like a must-have exposure, although if you're not going to run exposure, you're going to miss out on the exploding stun grenades, which actually can be extremely useful as we go on later in this build. That's going to be the skills. Let's dive into the aspects. So as for the aspects here, well, we're going to start off with the helmet. We have the aspect of shared misery. This is going to give us a potential chance to share the crowd controlled effects that we're applying to the enemies. The higher tier you go, this becomes more and more important, extremely valuable there. We're going to be running the aspect of might for extra damage reduction on our basics. Frostbitten gauntlets. This one is the one that you can potentially change if you wish. You can go ahead and get additional freezes with the grenades, with exposure and a certain heart. But if you don't want to run frostbitten, you can run some other options in terms of a heart, as well as the aforementioned exposure passive. You're going to want to change that out. Cheats is going to be really, really core because we're going to be crowd controlling all the time. This is going to give us extra movement speed and extra damage reduction. Penitent Greaves, just to give us a Frigid Finesse proc, as well as the Frostbitten synergy. We have the Disobedience aspect for extra damage reduction, or I guess I should say armor, which turns into damage reduction. Accelerating Ring for extra core skill attack speed, or rather, critical strikes with our core skills give us extra attack speed. We're in the Corruption aspect as well, because we are going to be vulnerable, applying vulnerable so often with our blast trappers, and that's going to give us extra effectiveness of our poison imbuement. On top of that, we're gonna have the blast trappers aspect. This is really, really core to the trapper build and was not working with the barber beforehand. Edge masters, because we're gonna have permanent 100% energy when we're killing trash, and then blade dancers for that twisting blades aspect. That's gonna be the aspects. Let's talk about the stats. So in the description down below on that link, you're going to have the complete breakdown of all the stats that I recommend, but actually my gear is pretty solid right now, so I can just use my gear as an example. For the helmet, you're going to want the ranks of poison imbuement. That's going to be pretty nice. Cooldown reduction is very, very important with this build, as well as total armor, and basically every damage reduction stat that you can get on your armor pieces. The chest piece, you're going to want damage reduction from poison enemies, damage reduction from distant enemies, armor, these types of things. The gauntlets, attack speed, crit strike chance, twisting blades ranks. These are the three most important. After that, critical strike damage with poison imbued skills and with potentially all stats. That could be very nice. Pants, same thing as the chest piece. Damage reduction from distance enemies, total armor, these types of things. Penitent Greaves, they give you the stats. Nothing too difficult there. Amulets, you want the Frigid Finesse passive. That's going to give you the biggest damage increase because of the massive damage that you're getting when you're hitting frozen enemies. You could also run with like Weapon Mastery. You could also run with Exploit. Along with that, energy cost reduction. That's going to be pretty key for bosses in particular, but also just helps you keep up that permanent 100% energy, as well as giving you damage reduction. You need damage reduction, so damage reduction with close enemies, damage reduction in general on the amulet. And then for the rings, critical strike chance, critical strike damage, vulnerable damage. These are pretty important. After that, you can go with like lucky hit chance. That's not bad because a lot of things apply off of lucky hit here. Or you can go with maximum life. I do generally like maximum life a little bit in our builds because it's going to be pretty important. As for the weapons, critical strike chance or critical strike damage with imbued skills, dexterity, and vulnerable damage. Those are the ones you're going to look for. And specifically for the crossbow, same thing, but instead of like dexterity, I would go with all stats, because if you can find all stats, that's going to help you boost up your Paragon board. As for gems and the hearts, I really, really like rubies or topaz in the armor. I've been leaning towards rubies a little bit more, but topaz does help you out in situations where you have a lot of CC. Rubies, because we have the shadow step very consistently up, we don't actually get CC'd that often, and so rubies actually give us more general value. As for the weapons, we want to go for emeralds every single time. Extra critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. We're going to have consistent 100% uptime and vulnerable. And then for hearts, well, first one, the revenge heart. This is going to be pretty important. Giving us incoming damage is suppressed. That's going to be so important. And then on top of that, the barber. These two are going to be incredibly important. It's ironic, or I guess you say on the contrary to what this kind of suggests, the longer duration barbers, the 4-second ones, actually can potentially be better in a lot of scenarios, but I might have a full video on that later. And then as for the third heart, this is like flex slot. Now, the most generally useful one is going to be the Tempting Fate, which gives you critical strike damage. That's going to be generally useful if you're running all the critical strike chance increasings and you have high critical strike chance. However, the Vicious Heart here that I have, that's going to give you the chance to launch stun grenades, actually helps out with the CC aspect and works really well with the Frostbitten. If you're running the Frostbitten aspect, I recommend running this heart for the extra stun grenades for extra CC. That is really, really key. If not, you can run Tempting Fate. You can also run like a bunch of other options. There's so many options with the hearts, but one thing's for sure, I would definitely recommend the Barber and the Revenge heart. These two are exceptionally good. Now let's talk specialization and Paragon. So with the specialization here, we're actually running Preparation, which is a little bit different from what we've seen before. Inner Sight is not useful in this build because of our constant energy generation. Preparation instead actually gives us a little bit of extra death traps when we're clearing out trash. When you get to the boss, swapping to inner sight or combo points can be better if you choose to do so. Inner sight in particular is going to give you extra energy, but combo points generally is what I lean towards just because of the extra damage. As for the Paragon, well, I'm going to showcase this in the actual build breakdown because I, well, have a little bit of a different setup because I wanted to save as much gold as possible changing out my Paragon boards. First off, though, we're going to start off with a closer glyph. This is going to give us extra damage reduction while wielding a melee weapon, which we will constantly be doing so. Second one is going to be Deadly Ambush. That's going to be the Paragon board that we're going to go for, along with the Diminished glyph. This is going to give us extra reduction in physical damage from vulnerable enemies. Following that up, we're going to have the Turf glyph with the Tricks of the Trade. Tricks of the Trade is going to work really well. Our basic counts as a marksman skill. Our Twisting Blades counts as a cutthroat skill. So pretty amazing synergy there. Cheap Shot's going to be the fourth board, right? The fourth board. And Cheap Shot's going to give us extra increased damage for each nearby enemy that's crowd controlled. That's huge when in this build. Along with the Control glyph, extra damage against slowed or chilled enemies, or even more so against frozen enemies, which will be very, very constant. And then lastly, we have the Combat glyph on the No Witnesses board. The Combat glyph is going to give us extra critical strike damage, as well as have it restore some energy. That's going to be the breakdown of the specialization as well as the Paragon board. Let's dive into the actual showcase and annihilating tier 60s. So here we are in a random tier 62. The build really revolves around CCing a lot. So you really want to get these traps out. You want to be able to go ahead and hit those traps, hit the grenades, hit the ice fields, freeze them, do all that synergy, which allows you to get more damage reduction out. It also allows you to do more damage in general. Now, tier 60s are kind of my ideal farming tier just because, well, they're very easy in general. Like, you're not going to die a ton, and if you do, well, you're not going to die the entire time. And, well, they're very easy to blow up, which is very good XP per hour and generally ends up being my best. Usually you want to just apply the basic every once in a while to keep up that damage reduction from your basic attacks. And then you just find a group and, well, we're off to the races, right? We go ahead and apply the traps, drop the traps, and then you should just detonate everyone with that. You don't want to go ahead and kind of stick in one location too long. You do rely around that trap cooldown sometimes. If you want to go ahead and engage enemies, do make sure that you have a trap up if you do plan on jumping into the enemies. So for example, in a location like this where we have a lot of enemies, make sure you have a poison trap up or a death trap up, or if you plan to jump into any group of enemies, make sure you at least have one trap up. That's your main source of, you know, kind of damage reduction, but also like being able to CC them is just overall very, very good. So you can see here we can group them up and go ahead and kill them off. Drop another poison trap here, making sure that we're using our poison imbuement to kind of detonate or at least apply a bunch of extra damage and then detonate them with our barber. Our barber is going to keep us basically at permanently full energy. Watch out for the corpse bows. These guys are really brutal. And of course, any situation where you have the corpse bows, you might get one shot. I mean, that's just the nature of the game unless you have enough distance damage reduction. Other than that, a few things that you might want to keep in mind is, well, make sure that you are killing people with the barber, because if you're not going to get the energy regeneration. And also the poison trap and the poison imbuement are very important if you happen to have damage reduction against poison enemies or extra damage against poison enemies. Both those things will help you out. And of course, we have it in our skill tree, so it's always going to help you out a lot. The key to this build over anything else is ranged units are the scary units, okay? Melee units, not too bad. And you can see here, I can just walk through them. I can kind of annihilate them as I'm going through. We drop our traps. They kind of just die. They get CC'd. The things that are really scary are situations like this, where you're killing a bunch of enemies in melee range, but then you also have, let's say, a corpse bow or some sort of ranged, like, railgun type character. You guys know what I'm talking about, the phantom ones with like the laser beam that just shoots you and one shots you. Yeah, those guys can be a little bit scary sometimes. Everyone in melee range kind of just gets CC'd and dies, you know. That's not really what we're worried about. So if there's one piece of advice that I can give you is damage reduction from distant enemies actually ends up being really, really strong. And also the kind of knowledge of random corpse bows or laser beam railguns or any characters like that in the outskirts, you have to keep those in mind because, well, these are the only ways you can really die. Melee range, basically never gonna die because of all our damage reduction from close enemies and all of our CC. Other than that, I'm just gonna go ahead and skip ahead so I can show you all the boss fight. I lied, I am back in another fight. I wanted to mention quickly that one really important thing to remember is because we're running preparation, which is not something that a lot of people run typically, it's usually inner sight or combo points. Well, we don't need those because, well, we don't need the damage from combo points. And we also don't need the energy from inner sight because of our massive energy regeneration from the barber. We're going to be running prep. So with preparation, your cooldowns will actually get reset with our ultimate. So using a poison imbuement before you get into a fight or a poison trap is actually not bad because technically you're not wasting it because it's just going to get reset anyways. And also your death trap's going to get reset more often because of the energy that you're spending. So just something to keep in mind as you're going through, and especially in situations like where you're running into a boss fight or whatever, and maybe you plan on immediately using your death trap, or just in general going through and fighting random monsters, you will get a full reset on your skills, so it's something to keep in mind. So here we are at the boss fight, and I'll just go ahead and quickly show this for you all, kind of showcase the amount of damage that we're going to pump out. Now the boss fights are a little bit different. Of course, this one in particular is a little bit annoying because we have those little tornadoes that stop us from kind of sitting on top of the boss. But one thing that's really important to notice is our energy is not going to be that infinite energy on the boss fight. So one thing that you might want to consider is to swap over your spec to combo points or to inner sight. Both those will work better, but you could see the damage very solid still, even with the buffs to monster HP. And in particular, if you're able to CC them, which you will with the death trap and the poison trap and all that good stuff, you're gonna really basically one-shot the boss if it's CC. So something to keep in mind. Hopefully that was helpful, guys. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, sub to the channel, and I'll see you all for the next one.